The chainsaw went quiet in a way that didn't sound like I'd shut it off. The bar disappeared into the oak, and the engine bogged and died. And all I had was that heavy mechanical silence you only get when something's wrong. Most men grab the handle and pull. That is the wrong move. There's a moment halfway through what I'm about to tell you where most men make it worse. And there's a sound this wood makes right before it lets go that you need to know before you ever run a saw on a hillside. Stick with me. That morning, I'd come up the ridge before first light to drop a red oak that had been crowding a fence line for going on 3 years. Big tree, maybe 22 inches across at the base, old growth timber on a steep hillside, bark thick as my thumb. I'd been cutting long enough that I should have known better. I made my notch cut on the downhill side, came around back, started the felling cut, and the bar sank in about 14 inches before the kerf closed up and held it there like a hand closing around a finger. The engine bogged. I released the throttle on instinct, which was the right call. Some men will gun it when they feel resistance. That reflex is how you burn a clutch, strip the bar, or snap a drive link off the chain entirely. The saw was done for the moment, and I knew it. I let go of the handle and stepped back. That step back is the whole thing, really. Not just physically stepping away from the machine, stepping back inside your head, resetting, because the pinch is not a mechanical failure. The bar didn't get stuck because the saw wasn't powerful enough or the chain was dull. It got stuck because the wood's weight shifted onto the cut and closed it. The tree's mass had been sitting on that kerf from the moment the fiber on my side started to give, and it closed down like a vise, which told me something I should have known before the engine ever started. I had misread where that weight was sitting. The tree had been talking to me from the time I walked up on it, and I hadn't been listening. A pinched bar is not bad luck. It's a correction. The wood is telling you that you started in the wrong place. I circled the tree. That is what you do first. Not yank the bar, not call somebody, not fire up the saw again. You walk the tree the way you'd walk a sick animal before you try to treat it. I looked up into the crown, morning light coming through the canopy in broken slants. One side of that crown was heavier than the other by a fair margin. More mass, more branch spread, pulling north and back toward the ridge. I looked at the root flare where the trunk came out of the ground. One side lifting slightly, one side anchored deeper. I looked at the slope itself, the way the ground fell away downhill from the base, and I knew immediately what I'd done. That tree was not leaning downhill the way I'd assumed. The crown weight was pulling it back uphill and to the north. I'd put my notch cut in the wrong place entirely, started cutting against the tree's own intention, and the minute the fiber on my side started giving, the tree shifted onto the cut and took my saw with it. You can have GPS in your pocket that puts you within 10 feet of your location anywhere on Earth. You can have an app that shows you wind direction, barometric pressure, and a 3-day forecast. None of that tells you which way a tree wants to fall. That knowledge requires you to stop walking fast and start looking slow. Crown weight, root flare, the lie of the land beneath the trunk. These 3 things will tell you a tree's intention before any cut is made, if you'll spend 2 minutes reading them before you pull the cord. I hadn't spent those 2 minutes that morning. I was behind on firewood, I was in a hurry, and the tree corrected me immediately. Now I knew where the weight was sitting. The next question was getting the bar free without damaging it. And this is where most men go wrong in a way that costs them real money, because the instinct is to deal with the saw, to wiggle it, work it, force it. What I want you to understand is that the bar is not your problem. The bar is a piece of steel sitting in a gap that's gotten smaller. Your problem is the gap. You open the gap, the bar walks out on its own. Leave the saw alone and address what's actually wrong. I carry 2 plastic felling wedges in the back left pocket of my work pants every single day I'm in the woods with a chainsaw. Not 1, 2. Those wedges have been in that pocket so long the plastic is stained dark with bar oil and pine pitch and the smell of 100 different wood species. I pulled them out before the bar had time to cool. The first wedge goes into the kerf behind the bar, on the side opposite the heavy lean. You're trying to open the cut from the compression side. Give it somewhere to spread to. You drive it with the back of your hatchet, short controlled strokes, not swinging hard. You're not splitting anything. You're asking the kerf to give you a little room, a 1/4 inch, maybe half. The first wedge went in about 2 inches before it started to bind, not seated deep enough, so I set the second wedge beside it, offset by about a palm's width, and drove that one alongside the first. Between the two of them, I could hear a faint groan from the wood and feel a tiny amount of give when I moved the bar by hand. A $2 plastic wedge has saved more saws than any extended warranty ever written. But sometimes the wedge won't seat. The kerf is too tight, the compression too severe, the bar buried too deep for the wedge to get enough purchase. When that happens, you've got to think differently. The wedge works on the gap. What if instead of working the gap, you work the weight itself? That's where this gets interesting. Here's what I want you to understand about everything I'd done up to that point. The step back, the walk around the tree, the 2 wedges. Not a single one of those moves required anything I'd bought that morning, or ordered online, or charged overnight. They required observation, and they required tools built into my daily kit from years of habit. And here is the principle underneath all of them. Every single one required me to stop before I acted, to look before I touched, to understand before I forced. That is the entire operating logic of the men who worked these hills before chainsaws existed. Watch first, read what you're dealing with, then act, and act with precision. Modern habit runs directly counter to this. Something goes wrong, apply force. Force doesn't work, apply more. More doesn't work, call someone with better equipment. The woods will correct that sequence every single time, and the correction is usually expensive and sometimes painful. In a minute, I'm going to show you how to free a bar without touching the saw at all. And it's the part most people who watch a woodsman work never even notice he's doing. The wedges had given me a little movement, but not enough. The bar was still held, so I walked uphill about 15 feet, found a sourwood sapling about 2 inches through and reasonably straight, and cut it at the base with my hatchet, limbed it clean, and trimmed it to about 6 feet. Then I found what I needed, a root ball from a blowdown maybe 4 feet from the oak's trunk, solid and fixed in the ground, right height. I laid my pole against the root ball as a fulcrum, worked the forward end under the uphill side of the oak's trunk, and leaned steady pressure down on the lever end. Not a jerk, not a sudden push. Steady, building pressure, the way you'd press a cork into a bottle rather than pound it. You can feel the moment when the physics start working. The pressure builds through the pole. You hear a low creak from deep inside the trunk, and the wood shifts. Not much, maybe a 1/4 inch of movement, maybe less. But the bar dropped free and swung down clear of the kerf on its own weight. That is a principle older than any saw ever built. A lever and a fulcrum will move weight that no amount of direct pulling or twisting can match, and you can build one in 2 minutes from materials that are already lying on the ground in any woodlot in these mountains. The man who calls his buddy with a truck and a logging chain will wait 2 hours, scar the trunk, risk bending the bar against the chain load, and still possibly not solve the problem if the compression is bad enough. I walked back to my work with the saw in my hand, bar clean, chain intact, inside of 40 minutes from the moment the engine stopped. Now, there are times when the lever won't give you enough either. The trunk is too big, the root ball sits too far away, the angle is wrong, and no amount of steady pressure on a sourwood pole is going to shift that weight enough to free the bar. I've been in that situation too. What you do then is not force the issue with the same bar from the same angle. You go back to the truck and you get a shorter bar and you cut a relief kerf from the opposite side of the trunk. A cut that meets the original cut and takes the compression off by giving the wood somewhere to go. The bark splits, the trunk settles, and both bars come free. I keep a 14-inch bar behind the seat alongside the rope, not because I expect the 20-inch bar to fail, but because a second option is worth more than twice as much as a single option when you're alone in the woods. The second bar has gotten me out of 2 situations in 15 years where no other tool on the truck would have done it. That's not a lot of situations, but in both of them, having the spare was the difference between walking out with my equipment and walking out without it. A spare bar doesn't weigh much. Options don't weigh much. The habit of carrying them is almost nothing. The cost of not having them can be everything. Now there's a tree that's been worked from 2 directions, and it still hasn't come down. That means the hinge is doing something I need to understand. The saw is out now, but I've got a half-cut tree standing on a steep hillside with a compromised hinge, and that is the part that will get you killed if you don't understand what it means. I want to stop here and name something, because it matters to everything that follows, every move since the saw stopped. The walk around the tree, the reading of the crown, the 2 wedges, the lever cut from a sapling. None of it required me to buy anything, call anyone, or use electricity. It required things I'd built into my daily habit over years. The wedges were there because my uncle told me, when I was 17, that you never go into the woods with a saw without 2 wedges in your pocket. And I never forgot it. The hatchet on my belt, because the men who taught me always had a hatchet on their belt. The knowledge of the lever, because I watched old men solve problems with poles and rocks long before I understood the physics of it. The old woodsmen weren't lucky. They were loaded, quietly, habitually loaded with low-cost, low-weight redundancy that most people working today never even think to carry. The man who walks into the woods with just a saw and a smartphone has already lost before the first cut. The next part is about the hinge, the piece of wood that's holding this tree up right now. And what most people think they know about it is wrong. The hinge is not just what keeps the tree attached while it falls. I know that's how it gets described, but that description will get you hurt. The hinge is what controls the direction of fall. The notch tells the tree where to tip. The felling cut starts the release. But the hinge, the uncut fiber on the fall side of the trunk, is the rudder. It is the thing the entire tree pivots on as it goes down, and if that fiber is uneven in width across the trunk face, the tree will rotate as it falls. It will corkscrew. It will land 30 or 40 degrees off from where you planned, and at the speed a big hardwood falls. 30 degrees off can mean the difference between a clean landing and a tree through a fence, through a truck door, into another person working downhill from you. The correct hinge width is roughly 10% of the trunk diameter, held even across the full width of the cut. On a 22-inch oak, that's about 2¼ inches of uncut fiber, consistent from one side to the other. When I examined my cut, after getting the bar free, the hinge was uneven. The side where the bar had gotten pinched had a thinner hinge, barely 1.5 inches. The other side was nearly 3 inches. The reason was simple. When the tree had shifted weight onto my cut earlier, it had stressed the fiber unevenly, thinning it on the pinched side. If I'd made my felling cut right then without correcting it, that tree would have rotated on the way down and landed 30 degrees off target. I've watched felling videos online that show the cut and show the tree fall and call it good. Not one of them explains why the hinge width matters. Not one shows what happens when it's uneven. What happens is a tree, the weight of 2 pickup trucks going sideways at speed in a direction nobody planned for, and that is a thing you cannot undo. Correcting the hinge meant I needed to know precisely where the tree wanted to go. Its true fall line, not where I'd originally assumed. That took me back to what I'd read in The Crown and the Root Flare 20 minutes earlier. Heavy to the north and uphill. That was its natural intention. I'd been fighting it. Now I needed to work with it, set my rope in that direction, and make the hinge. Even so, the tree would fold cleanly along that line rather than twist. A balanced tree, one that isn't strongly loaded to one side, will sometimes just sit after the felling cut, held up by its own root tension, by the stump, by adjacent brush that catches the crown. You cannot push a 22-inch oak with your hands. You can barely push it with a truck. But you can pull it if you set it up right before the last cut goes in. I carry a throw line and 100 feet of 3/8-inch rope coiled behind the seat of my truck. I've carried them for years, and there are seasons I never touch them. But the seasons when I need them badly. I ran the throw line up through a high crotch in the crown, 35, 40 feet up, threaded the pulling rope through it, and ran the rope to a standing white oak about 60 feet away in the fall direction I'd chosen. Built a trucker's hitch on the anchor tree and hauled tension into the line by hand until the rope was taut and humming slightly under load, not vibrating loose but held, as if it was already carrying something. Then I went back to the stump, corrected the hinge, and prepared the final cut. That rope wasn't going to force the tree anywhere. What it was doing was giving the tree an easier path than the dangerous one. If the oak wanted to drift north with its crown weight, well, north was exactly where the rope was pulling it, and the rope would amplify that tendency into a controlled fall rather than a random one. There is a difference between guidance and force in the woods that takes years to feel clearly. Force is what you apply when you haven't prepared correctly. Guidance is what happens when you have men who make the felling cut and then step back and hope the tree goes where they want, hope nothing catches the crown, hope the hinge holds. Those men are gambling with a tool that weighs 20,000 pounds and falls at 40 miles an hour. Hope is not a rigging plan. Now I'm at the last cut. The rope is set, the hinge is corrected, the escape route is clear. 45 degrees behind the stump, uphill and to the right, away from the fall line. And right before I squeeze the throttle, the tree says something to me, if I'm quiet enough to hear it. Every move from the stuck bar forward had been the same idea in different clothing. Open the kerf instead of fighting it. Shift the weight instead of pulling against it. Guide the fall instead of hoping for it. The old understanding of wood isn't a collection of separate tricks picked up from different places. It is one principle, applied again and again in different forms. You don't fight the material's nature. You redirect it. The forest has its own physics and its own intentions, and your job is to work within them, not against them. Modern equipment is powerful enough that people have forgotten this. A big saw will cut through a lot of mistakes right up until the moment it can't. And when it can't, all that horsepower is completely useless, and you're standing alone in the woods with a problem that only physics and patience will solve. There's a sound this wood makes when it's about to let go. I learned it from an old man up on Clinch Mountain, and I've never forgotten it. It'll save your life if you learn it too. I shut the saw off. That's what he made me do. That first real season, I was cutting timber. Old man named Earl moved through these mountains like he'd been here since before the logging roads. We were mid-cut on a big leaning beach, up on a north-facing hollow. Rope set, hinge measured, escape route clear, and he reached over and touched my elbow, and I throttled down without knowing why. In the sudden quiet, I heard it, a low rolling creak from deep inside the wood. Not sharp, not a crack, not the sound of a branch rubbing in the wind. A groan, a deep, slow, internal groan, like the tree was breathing out for the last time. 2 full seconds of it before the beach moved visibly at all. 2 seconds is enough time to take 3 clear steps to your escape route. 2 seconds is the difference between standing at a safe distance and not standing anymore. Earl didn't explain it. He just watched me hear it. The tree came down, clean and exactly where the rope was pulling it, and he looked at me afterward and said, "Now you know." That was the whole lesson. No manual, no diagram, no safety video. Just silence and a sound, and a man old enough to know that some things can only be passed on by making someone stop and listen. Green hardwood under tension doesn't release the way dry wood does. It doesn't snap clean. The hinge fibers let go in sequence, starting from the thinnest part. And that sequential release is what makes the sound, a low, rolling stutter that starts inside the trunk and rolls outward. You cannot feel it through the handles. You cannot see it. You can only hear it. And to hear it, you have to cut the engine, or at minimum throttle way down, in those final moments before the tree moves. I stood with the rope taut and the hinge corrected and made my felling cut, and then I throttled down and listened. The oak spoke. That same low, rolling groan Earl had made me hear on the beach 20 years earlier, coming from inside 22 inches of red oak. I moved to my escape route at a controlled walk. Not a run, a walk, because running is how you trip. And I stood and watched. The rope pulled taut against the anchor tree. The hinge tore. The oak came down exactly where the crown weight and the rope had agreed it should go. Not where I'd assumed that morning when I misread the lean, but where I'd redirected it after learning what it was trying to tell me from the start. It hit the ground with a sound like a cannon and lay there quiet, crown down in the opening I'd planned. Fence line clear, bar undamaged, chain intact. Here is what that morning actually taught me, and it took me a long time to be able to say it in plain terms. The chainsaw did not get stuck because of bad luck. It didn't get stuck because the bar was wrong for the tree, or the engine wasn't powerful enough. It got stuck because I had not read the tree before I started cutting. I was behind on firewood, I was moving too fast, and I put my notch in the wrong place without spending 2 minutes looking at where the weight actually was. Every single technique I used after the bar went in. The wedges, the sourwood lever, the hinge correction, the rope, the sound. Every one of those was just a way of going back to do what I should have done before the engine ever started. The pinch was the tree's way of stopping me and making me begin again correctly. That silence after the engine dies, that's the tree talking. Most people just don't know the language. The knowledge of how wood behaves under load, how a hinge controls a fall, how a lever built from a sapling and a root ball can move weight, that no machine can pull directly. This knowledge is older than any chainsaw ever manufactured. Men who worked these ridges with crosscut saws and broad axes understood it because there was no engine powerful enough to bail them out when they got it wrong. They passed it on at the landing, at the sawmill, at the woodpile on a cold morning, the old man making the young one stop and watch and listen rather than handing him a manual. It lived in hands and habits, not in pages. Next time you're standing at a tree with a saw warming in your hand, stop before the first cut. Read the crown, find the heavy side, trace the root flare, look at how the ground falls away from the base. Give that tree 2 minutes of your attention before you give it any steel. That single habit, just that one, will tell you more about what's coming than any machine you can buy. Tell me below, have you ever had a saw pinched in a tree? What did you do? I want to know whether you reached for the pull cord or stepped back and read the wood first. This knowledge doesn't need a battery. It doesn't need a signal. It just needs someone willing to stop and learn it before the saw goes in.